Second Vice Chair Covesi. Representative Ackerman. Representative Agello.
Here.
Representative Baginski.
Present.
Representative Felix.
Here.
Representative Hull. Representative Kennedy.
Present.
Representative Knight.
Here.
Representative McGaw.
Present.
Representative Nardone.
Present.
Representative Newberry.
Here.
Representative Shawcross Smith.
Present.
Representative Tanzi.
Present.
And Representative Hull?
Yes.
Okay. Fourteen present, one absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We have 9 bills on the calendar to hear today. Today is February 26, 2021. We are in the House Committee on State Government and Elections. The 9 bills are House Bill 5281 from Representative Vella-Wilkinson, House Bill 5284 from Representative Place, House Bill 5417 from Chairman Bennett, House Resolution 5419 from Leader Filippi, House Resolution 5420 from Leader Filippi, House Bill 5423 from Representative O'Brien, House Bill 5484 from Floor Leader Jay Edwards, and House Bill 5485 from Representative Edwards, and House Bill 5418 from Representative Amore. I will entertain a motion to hold all 9 of those bills for further study.
So moved.
Moved by Representative Vigello and Representative Ackerman. Any seconds?
Second.
Second from Zoom somewhere.
Rep Felix.
Rep Felix. Clerk, can we have a roll call vote on holding all 9 bills on the calendar for further study?
Chairman Shanley.
Yes.
First Vice Chair Messier.
Yes.
Second Vice Chair Covesi. Representative Ackerman.
Yes.
Representative Agello.
Yes.
Representative Baginski.
Yes.
Representative Felix.
Yes.
Representative Hull.
Yes.
Representative Kennedy.
Yes.
Representative Knight.
Yes.
Representative McGaw.
Yes.
Representative Nardone. Representative Newberry.
Yes.
Representative Shawcross Smith. And Representative Tanzi.
Yes.
Okay. The ayes have it.
The first bill we're going to consider tonight comes to us from Chairwoman Vella-Wilkinson. It's House Bill 5281, an act relating to military affairs and defense emergency management. It permits Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous meetings to be held during a declared disaster emergency. Chairwoman Vella-Wilkinson is with us. Welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'd like to start off by framing this situation. During the quarantine last year, not only were liquor stores considered critical retail, but restaurants were also permitted to sell alcoholic beverages as part of their takeout menu offerings. The logic, as it was explained to me, was twofold. Stores were open for business in neighboring states, and hospital beds were at a premium, especially stricken with COVID-19. There was no point in forcing alcohol abusers into detox by eliminating access to liquor and then having hospital beds occupied by these unfortunate souls. That would have made sense if AA meetings were also designated as essential during the pandemic, rather than relegated to the status of a social gathering. And by the way, quite a number of the members have been court-ordered to attend these meetings. That doesn't sound particularly simple to me. The mistake in this designation was not only dangerous, but it was potentially life-threatening. AA meetings are therapeutic for individuals who face the challenge of addiction. As a social interaction, meetings are limited to 5 and then 15 participants. Seating had to be 6 feet apart for social distancing. As an essential function, participants would have been limited to a total of 25% of the posted fire code occupancy. So under that current policy or the lack of clear-cut policy, if an individual had the bad luck of coming to an AA or an NA meeting a few minutes late and 15 members had already been seated, the last person would have been turned away. Sorry, friend, get sober some other day, but don't be too disappointed because you could stop by a number of liquor stores on your way home and grab a cold beer. But try sobriety some other day. And yes, it is possible to attend online meetings if you have a home computer. How effective are they as a venue for an organization focused on fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other so that they can solve their problems, and help others to recover? I have no idea. But ask any teacher or student who was forced last year into distance learning if the process was satisfactory. Some of the AA members have the resources and know-how to log on to a Zoom meeting, but certainly not all of them. And of course, the libraries were not always opened either. I have been made aware of this situation by a constituent in District 21 in Warwick who had been reaching out to both the Rhode Island Department of Health and the Rhode Island Business Regulations Department for guidance, but he received no real success. When he explained the situation to me, it made perfect sense to me. So I then, as a representative, reached out to the governor's office, to the Department of Health, and the Department of Business Regulations. And that was when I found out why the liquor stores and the restaurants were allowed to continue selling alcohol. So that basically is the issue. And I am hoping that this committee would see fit to pass House Bill 5281 so that in the event of any type of an emergency in the future, that Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous meetings, which provide essential behavioral therapy, would be seen as essential and fall in the proper category to provide additional services for its members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Madam Clerk, Chairman Corvasi arrived. I believe he'd like his presence recorded and your votes in the affirmative to hold all bills on the calendar for further study, Chairman.
Absolutely.
Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the caveat that I hope that this emergency comes to an end and we never have to actually deal with this issue again, I really like this bill. I just have one concern about it, and that maybe it should be broadened. And the reason is, I know we've had other statutes in different topics where we've written private organizations into the statute, and I've pointed out that doesn't make a lot of sense before, like arbitration, for example, we'll put in the AAA or something like that. There are other organizations that provide these kinds of services. Is there a way to maybe broaden the language to, for example, Al-Anon, which I think is related to Alcoholics Anonymous, but deals with a separate topic, and just other groups that provide the same kind of thing? I'd like to have it more inclusive in that sense. I think it'd be a better bill if we did that.
Thank you very much, Representative. That has been brought up to me actually by some of the members of the organization. And yes, I think it makes perfect sense to broaden the language so that we're not leaving anyone out in the cold.
Any other questions for Chairwoman Vella-Wilkinson?
Chairman?
I know I came in late for this hearing, but I think this is a great bill to start off the afternoon. A lot of merit and a very, very good bill.
I believe I heard somebody on Representative Tanzi.
Thank you. I was just wondering if, similarly, I used to lead support groups for victims of domestic violence. Something along those lines? Could the language be brought in to include something like that, which is a safety issue? Survivors who were no doubt going through extraordinarily difficult times during the pandemic, and some would argue were more in need of this type of support. So just another possible possibility to broaden the language.
Chairman, I'm happy to work with Representative Tanzi to make sure that the language is inclusive of any type of therapeutic meeting.
Excellent. Sounds like some good ideas. Any other questions for Chairwoman Vella-Wilkinson here or on WebEx? Representative Agello?
Yes, I hear the concern for people being able to continue with this really important help in their recovery and holding on to recovery. A colleague just lost his daughter to drug addiction yesterday. So I hear it often, too often. But this is the first time that I've heard anyone say that the logic behind liquor stores being kept open through the pandemic was so that alcoholics could get alcohol and then therefore wouldn't be forced into cold turkey or whatever it is for going without suddenly. This first time I've heard that, and so I'm curious whether the sponsor would tell us where she heard that.
May I respond?
Of course.
All right. Okay. Representative Vigello, during the summer, when I first tried to approach the governor's office, because she was sending out so many executive orders, I actually thought it would be easier to present the problem to someone within her chain of command to say, listen, while she's busy sending out executive orders, maybe she can identify this as an essential function. And it was one of the department heads that I had reached out to who said to me, first of all, the Massachusetts liquor stores are all open, and second of all, we can't afford to take up space with the beds with people that are being forced into detox. So I was surprised myself. I was told that in no uncertain terms this summer, because I originally had created this bill at the beginning of the pandemic. And, of course, we weren't in session. And then there was a discussion that I had with Speaker Mattiello as to whether it should be a resolution or if it should be an actual bill. And then the concern was that a resolution is a promise, but that it doesn't have the force of law behind it. And so I thought that when we came back, there would be an opportunity to present it. And of course, the only bills that we were really listening to were those that were affected by the budget. But I was told that by someone that was in state government.
Representative Place, do you have a question?
Not a question, but I just want to back up what the representative just said. I had similar conversations, plus there were meter reports to the same at the beginning of the outbreak when liquor stores were kept open. The media outlets were reporting the exact same set of circumstances that the representative just stated.
Any other questions for Chairwoman Vella-Wilkinson? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do have a constituent that is going to be one of the witnesses this afternoon. Thank you.
I do have Joseph Harrington signed up for verbal testimony.
Yes, from the great city of Warwick. Thank you.
Excellent. Is Mr. Harrington available? Good afternoon, Mr. Harrington. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Representative Vella-Wilkinson's bill, and you've signed up to be a witness, and you have the floor.
Thank you. And thanks to the committee for making the time for this bill. So my name is Joe Harrington. I am an alcoholic. I have been in sobriety since June 25th, 2015, a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I want to be clear, I am not here speaking on behalf of Alcoholics Anonymous. They don't take a position on matters of controversy. I'm here to speak on this bill because it's a bill I fully and wholeheartedly support. Alcoholism and drug addiction are a pandemic in themselves. If it wasn't for the ability to go to the meetings that I went to after I got out of ad care back in June of 2015, I don't believe I would be sober today. And what this pandemic has brought inadvertently is the closing of these meetings because of either the disinformation or misinformation as it pertained to what 12-step groups actually were. And a lot of places can do business virtually, and both of these programs have tried to do business virtually, but this program since the 1930s, 1937, has been a program that requires for one addictive personality to connect with another addictive personality and to be able to understand that our troubles aren't unique to ourselves. And what the closing of these meetings have led to, beyond the controversy that it created as to whether or not we should be having meetings, and there was a lot of turmoil within both fellowships as it related to that, because we don't want to do something wrong, and at the same token, we know what the program brings to anybody who has been in the program. And the fact is, if I had tried to get sober in the time frame of the pandemic, I wouldn't have even known where a meeting was, because we literally non-published all face-to-face meetings. It's been historic within the halls of these programs that you'll have somebody come in and they've been ordered there by a judge, or we will have made contact with somebody by doing a commitment to places like AdCare, the Phoenix House, and other places that deal with this. The court systems and the police and everything have long since identified with the importance of what being part of these groups are. And this isn't something that can be accomplished easily, as a business conducting this business online without the personal contact. In our environment, and backed up by some medical reports that have been written, relapse of drug addiction and alcohol addiction has skyrocketed. Drunk drive-in incidents have skyrocketed. And yet there's no place for these people like myself who are suffering from what we suffer from to be able to seek the help that we need to seek to be able to get sober. So I applaud Representative Vella-Wilkinson's bill that addresses this. And it addresses the fact that it's been overlooked. I don't think that there's a person on the committee or a person in the State House that doesn't acknowledge the fact that alcoholism and drug addiction is a very serious problem, and it's rampant, and it can strike anybody at any point in time. And having somebody want to have a video conference, and not have that personal connection to be able to sit down and to speak to another human being to talk about their struggles, and let the person who's recovered talk about their struggles and how that they've been able to overcome them, that is like telling a diabetic to take half of their insulin and it'll be okay. It is it's a watered down program. I hope that this committee will support Representative Vella-Wilkinson's bill, and when we're in a pandemic like this that forced alcoholics and addicts into isolation, which isolation is where alcoholics and addicts do their best work, because we don't do it in front of other people, we isolate. And when we allowed take-out alcoholic beverages from restaurants, alcoholic curbside pickup, from liquor stores, and yet we didn't consider the fact of the people who are suffering from addiction to those, and we told them, we're going to lock you at home so you can be by yourself, there was no place for these people to go. Now, I say that where there have been meetings that have continued, and they do it in a very safe manner. If you went to a meeting that I attend, the chairs are spaced 6 feet apart. There's hand sanitizer as people come in. There's masks that the groups have bought for people coming in. Alcoholics aren't stupid people. We do the things that makes us safe, and that's why these meetings are so important. And that's when a crisis like this pandemic strikes, that we need to make sure that we don't only just take care of some of the people, but we take care of all of the people. And we have a responsibility to allow these people to be able to seek the help that they need so they don't slip into relapse. And again, all you have to do is go out on Dr. Google, and you can see how much higher the rate of relapse is during the pandemic than normal relapse. But I thank this committee for its time. I urge your support of the bill, and I thank Representative Vella-Wilkinson for allowing me to testify here today. And it comes with a little bit of controversy because in AA we're about our anonymity, but my anonymity is not as important as doing what I need to do to try to save another human life. And that's what AA has done since 1937, is it's focused on taking people out of the jaws of death and trying to save their life. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Harrington from members of the committee? No. Mr. Harrington, thank you very much for your time and for calling in.
Thank you very much.
There are no other witnesses signed up to testify verbally. Steve Brown from the ACLU testified that he does not oppose the bill, but it needs to be amended. And that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5281. Next, we're going to move to a couple of bills from Floor Manager Edwards, House Bills 5484 and 5485. 5484 is an act relating to public records, access to public records. It provides an exemption to the access to public records law for winners of lottery prizes. And House Bill 5485, also from Floor Manager Edwards, is an act relating to state affairs and government open meetings. It allows school committees to add items to their agendas for the purpose of discussion only without having to publish notice of the additional items. Is Representative Edwards available? I think I see his
here,
pretty
Chairman.
face on WebEx. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. These are both pretty straightforward pieces of legislation. The first one, I know the Lottery Commission has had some concerns with it, they say. It allows someone who wins the lottery to remain anonymous. There's not rocket science involved here. This happens in a number of states already. The lottery says that one of their concerns is that people will become suspicious of the lottery flipping the winnings to someone else. They haven't had any cases across the country of the governor's cousin or the attorney general's nephew winning the lottery in secret. This is a pretty straightforward thing. People who win the lottery, as everyone knows, are hounded by innumerable groups. Everyone who gets their name will hound them for money. If you win the lottery, you shouldn't have to go through that kind of abuse. It is allowed in other states. Rhode Island can easily follow suit. I don't think this is a very heavy lift, and I would ask the committee to consider it and move it to the floor.
Representative Edwards, are you concerned about winning the lottery?
Actually, I'm not, but one of my constituents brought this forward to me, and I kept asking him if he wins, am I going to get a small piece of it?
I think you might be entitled to it. Are there any actual?
But he'll be anonymous.
Are there any actual questions for Representative Edwards on House Bill 5484? There's no one signed up to testify regarding 5484, but there are individuals that have submitted written testimony. Steve Brown from the ACLU is opposed. Kenneth McGill from the Pawtucket Board of Canvassers supports the legislation, and Mark Ferkelo from the Rhode Island Department of Revenue Lottery Division has concerns about the legislation.
Yeah, he called me, Chairman.
He did. Excellent.
Yes.
Any other questions on 5484 from members of the committee? Representative Agello? You're muted still.
Okay. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the concerns of Mr. Ferkelo and was it Mr. Ferkelo and Department of Revenue, and also the concerns that Steve Brown wrote about.
The chairman could read those to you. I talked to Mr. Ferkelo. He gave me his concerns, which I very closely paraphrased. But I don't have any idea what Steve Brown talked about.
And I have one other question. Perhaps you can answer it, Jay. Are there any other states that allow this privacy for big winners?
Yes, there are. There are several. I can get the list for you for the committee.
Thank you.
And Representative Agello, the written testimony that from Mr. Ferkelo, Mr. McGill, and Steve Brown is going to be available online for you to review. It already is available online for you to review.
All right. All right. And for the public also?
Yes, absolutely. Are there any other questions on 5484? Representative Edwards, do you want to discuss 5485 now?
I will, Chairman. Thank you. This is another great piece of legislation from the East Bay. We were asked to introduce this legislation on behalf of the Tiverton School Committee. They are the only body, a school committee is, they're the only body precluded by law from being able to open for discussion only a topic that hasn't been previously posted. Town councils are, various boards and commissions are. In Tiverton, we have a budget committee. They're allowed to bring up things for discussion that are not posted previously. There is really no reason for the school committees to be exempt, actually excluded from being able to bring something up for discussion only before, then they can't vote on it, they can only discuss it. But with the pandemic and let the meetings being postponed and shifted around, it would behoove us all to allow them to be able to discuss something only in advance of a vote at a later meeting, especially if something comes up that's got to do with the school system or how the administration's running or busing or how they're going to handle children and that kind of stuff. Again, they are the only public body who are actually precluded from being able to bring something up for discussion. And I will have a letter of recommendation from the Tiverton School Board coming.
Are there any questions for Representative Edwards? Steve Brown from
I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Representative McGaugh, you have the floor.
I just want to be sure that the public would still have an opportunity to participate in that discussion. That's my only concern, is that the reason for those rules is to allow public participation in that discussion. And so I just want to make sure that prior to any votes following that discussion, that there would be an open opportunity for people to add their voice.
The way the law is written, this is just to allow them to discuss. They would have to schedule and post a meeting or hearing on the actual item at a later date, and then the public would be able to jump in and voice their concerns or their support.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Representative Edwards? Okay, that will conclude testimony on House, oh, I didn't mention that the ACLU urges a minor amendment to the bill. Doesn't seem to indicate pro or con, but just a minor amendment of the words "or otherwise" on the second page of the bill.
I'd be more than open to that, Chairman.
Thank you.
Happy Friday, all. Thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Have a great afternoon.
You as well.
Next, we're going to move to Representative Place's bill, House Bill 5284, an act relating to elections, primary election dates. Bill would require that the primary election date, typically the 8th Tuesday preceding the biennial state elections, shall be held on the Wednesday immediately following Labor Day, only if the 8th Tuesday immediately follows Labor Day. So maybe you can explain that to us.
Overtime.
Sounds
It all
like an
comes down to
SAT
overtime.
question.
So one of my clerks, the town clerk in the town of Gloucester, brought this to my attention. As you all remember, we changed the primary date back because of concerns from the federal government about we only get mail ballots out in time to our overseas service members. But the week we chose just happens to fall very close to Labor Day every so often. Every so many years falls on the Tuesday after Labor Day. So it actually happened this year. And these little boards of canvassers, they've got limited budgets, and what they wind up having to do is call in janitors and things like that to set the polling sites up at these schools on a holiday, so they're forced to pay overtime. So this is just an attempt, some of these smaller cities and towns, and actually the big ones too, just to avoid that overtime cost every 7 years or whatever it is that the primary falls on the day after Labor Day.
Any questions for Representative Place or Representative Knight?
That's a good bill. I
Thank you.
strongly support it. Thank you.
Representative Messier? But
Has there been any concerns about school starting on that Wednesday? A lot of them start on the Wednesday after Labor Day. So it would be between the kids' first day of school and all these people coming to vote, it would be a little
It would be
chaotic, but
my understand. I mean, I'm just going to make an assumption. It would be no different than an election on a normal school day. I mean, we hold elections on school days on a regular basis. If again, there has been no concern. This is the first time the bill has had a hearing. I introduced it last year, but obviously everybody remembers what happened then. So that specific item hasn't come up. No one has mentioned it at this point.
no, I'm just concerned with the first day of school.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's pretty chaotic, the first day of school, but that's my only concern. Otherwise, fine.
Representative Newberry?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's town to town. I don't know what the state law is on this off the top of my head, but I know the schools in my district are not open on election day.
That-
Yeah, I think it's statewide, isn't it? I mean,
If it's in a school.
let me put it this way, I'm always outside of school on election day, and I've never seen a school in session, at least the ones I'm at, so.
Well, I think that's what happens. It's a school holiday typically if the election is that. It is on. It is on. Up is on, right? Up is on? I think the schools always are shut for election days. And I don't know how many people or how many districts are actually first day, the day after Labor Day. I mean, I know there's a trend
No,
to start
it's
the
not
week
the
before,
day after,
right?
it's the Wednesday. Labor
Right.
Day's on a Monday.
Well, that's what I'm
First day
saying.
of school
So
is
you're,
generally a Wednesday. Now, they're all different.
but if I hear you correctly, your concern is what? That the first day of school would fall on the Wednesday?
It always does. It's the election that would fall on the Wednesday with the first day of school.
So then it would either push the year off a day or they'd start Tuesday and have a day off, which would be weird, right?
But recent years, they close the school.
Right.
But they'd be closing it on what normally would be the first day of school. So,
Any further questions for Representative Place? We have one witness signed up for verbal testimony, Nick Lima, the registrar for the city of Cranston. Is Mr. Lima available? Mr. Lima, good afternoon. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Representative Place's bill, House Bill 5284, and you're signed up to testify in support. You have the floor. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you very much. Thank you, honorable members of the committee. I'm speaking to testify on what is a extremely good bill. And it actually, just before I start, just to clarify what some of the comments that were just made about schools being closed. Under Rhode Island General Law 1718-15, schools are closed statewide for any statewide primary or statewide general election, with the exception of New Shoreham. So under existing statute, for example, should this bill become law, schools would be closed on the Wednesday regardless. In fact, regardless of whether or not there was a contested primary in all towns, because under the statute, that's a non-school day. But that said, I just want to speak strongly and favorably of this bill, and I want to state for the record that I know the Board of Elections itself went on record in support of essentially this exact same legislation just over a year ago. I know the Secretary of State, as well as some of my colleagues and other boards of canvassers, such as Pawtucket, have submitted letters as well, along with the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns in support of this. And the reason why there's such unanimity in support of this legislation is because nearly every election official of the state, at least everyone that I've spoken with, is strongly in favor of this because of the logistical challenges that having an election or a primary, in this case, the day after a federal holiday, carries with it. And it's not just the financial cost, which is significant. In 2020, of course, we did have to have a major primary in a pandemic the day after the Labor Day holiday, and at a cost of probably around $100,000 for cities and towns statewide, including here in Cranston. We had an extra added cost of thousands of dollars of overtime. Here in Cranston, we were open at City Hall to the public on that day. We have our full staff in the office. We also conducted in-person emergency early voting on Labor Day. In addition to that, we also had our crews out in the field sitting in polling places, and that's where one of the major hurdles comes with the challenge of having an election after a holiday. Not only is there a cost for overtime for city personnel to set up polls, but in a city like Cranston, like in 2020, we had 30 polls that had to be set up on Labor Day, and not all of these were at public buildings. They include social halls, churches, many other private organizations, and other buildings that, in the pandemic itself, weren't necessarily easy to get into. Getting into them on a federal holiday made it that much more challenging. Each of these, especially the private facilities, had to ensure that staff were there to meet our setup crews through a wide setup window, because it takes quite some time on a federal holiday to meet us. And that was an expense for the polling locations. In some cases, that expense was carried forward to the cities and towns. It made it much more challenging, I think, than that really needed to be for us to set up those polling locations. And even under normal circumstances, for example, here in Cranston, we have 2 or 3 setup crews that start at 7 a.m. and we finish around midnight. So setting up the polls for the next day to ensure that those polls are ready and ready to open at 7 a.m. on the next day for the election is a monumental challenge, a monumental logistical challenge, and it really it can't be further hindered by the complications of a holiday. Aside from the logistical challenges and the cost, the other important consideration here is that many election laws provide for deadlines that are at 4 p.m. on the day before an election. Also, under a separate existing law, any election deadline that falls on a holiday shall fall on the next business day. This was a major problem for us with the September primary, because that meant that the emergency mail ballot deadline, or early voting deadline, which normally would fall at 4 o'clock on the day prior to an election, in fact fell at 4 o'clock on the day of the election itself. And that was a significant hindrance for our staff, who then had to continue to conduct emergency voting in our office, while also simultaneously operating 30 in-person polling locations throughout the city. It was unprecedented. It had never happened before. And it also created some concerns amongst ourselves regarding the security of the election process itself, because the reason that law exists for a very important reason, that the one election voting period must stop for the next succeeding one to begin. And in this case, we had two election voting periods overlapping, the emergency voting period and the election day itself, in-person operations at the polls. And that meant that, for example, the poll books supplied to the polling places could not possibly have been updated to remove names of voters who had requested a mail ballot or voted by an emergency mail ballot at City Hall, because it was still ongoing when the polls opened. And again, that was unprecedented. It was a result of the really first ever holding of a major primary election the day after a holiday. And that was one of the significant challenges that we, as elections officials, had to overcome, among many others, in 2020. And what we're hoping to avoid is having to repeat that same set of circumstances, expenses, and challenges in future elections. And looking ahead in the calendar, multiple times in the next decade and the next couple of decades, this will reoccur if left unaddressed. And I do want to also point out for the members as well, in 2018, we had a September election that was postponed by one day under existing statute due to a religious holiday. So there's already a provision in the law to hold a primary on a Wednesday, and that was held successfully on a Wednesday. It was well advertised by local boards of canvassers, the Secretary of State, as well as the Board of Elections in 2018, and the primary was successfully conducted in 2018 under those circumstances. I'm sure we could absolutely do it again. What I'm not confident that we could do again is hold another election the day after a primary without, again, undertaking a monumental expense and also carrying it with it significant risks for our workers and also for the election itself. Because, like I said, that overlap, that 4 o'clock before the election day deadline is critical. There's a reason that exists in law, and for it to be pushed forward to election day itself, it really didn't make much sense. So that's what I wanted to convey to the committee. I'm happy to answer any questions that the members may have, and I strongly hope that this, and on behalf of the Cranston Board of Canvassers itself, we all strongly hope that this bill becomes law.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Lima? There are no other witnesses signed up to testify verbally. Secretary Gorbea has signed up in support of the legislation and submitted written testimony. So that will conclude the hearing on House Bill 5284. Next, we'll take up Representative Amore's bill, House Bill 5418, an act relating to public officers and employees' appointment, qualification, and tenure of officers. This bill requires that all persons serving on boards and commissions appointed by the governor have a connection to the state through residence or licensure. Representative Amore, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Shanley and members of the committee. I appreciate you taking the time to hear this bill. The Judiciary Committee has passed this bill twice, and the full House has passed it once. And I cannot do a better job of explaining it than Chairman Shanley already did. It would require that the commissions and boards appointed by the governor are filled with Rhode Island residents or those that hold licensure in Rhode Island. We've had a couple of incidents over the past 4 or 5 years where there have been appointments made to the Commerce Corporation and most recently to the PUC, where the residents have not been, the appointments rather, have not been residents of Rhode Island, nor did they hold licensures. Now, in the regard to PUC, there is a restriction within the membership there that you be an elector of the state of Rhode Island, and that's why the latest nominee withdrew. But not all boards and commissions have that restriction placed within it, so that you'd have to be an elector. This would ensure that all appointments by the governor are either Rhode Island residents or hold licensure in Rhode Island. That would be for medical professionals, educators, business owners, etc. So I'd be happy to take any questions. It's a pretty straightforward bill. I believe it's good government common sense. The House has agreed with me in the past, and we hope this committee and the House will move forward on this bill in the future as well. Thank you.
Any questions for Representative Amore? Okay, there are no witnesses signed up opposed to or in support of 5418, so that will conclude the hearing on 5418. Thank you, Representative Amore.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Have a good weekend.
Next, we will take up two of Leader Filippi's bills, or resolutions. House Resolution 5419, a resolution to approve, publish, and submit to the electors a proposition of amendment to the Constitution of the state. Majority vote requirement through instant runoff voting for general officers and General Assembly members' election. And House Bill Resolution 5420, a resolution to approve and publish and submit to the electors a proposition of amendment to the Constitution, General Assembly to review regulations. Leader Filippi, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairman Shanley. And where would you like me to start, please?
You can start wherever you're most comfortable. How about 5419? Take it in numerical order.
With pleasure. So this is a resolution to amend our Constitution to require a system of instant runoff voting, as you had stated. Instant runoff voting has been used internationally for years and is trending within the United States as well. Currently, 2 states use instant runoff voting, Maine and Alaska, and major cities all over the country use it as well, including New York City, which is to go online with instant runoff voting in 2021. Essentially, what instant runoff voting is that if there are more than 2 candidates in a race, there's a chance that someone could get elected with a plurality, but not a majority. And the extreme example would be if you had 10 people running for an office, 8 of them got 10%, 1 got 9%, and 1 got 11%. The person with 11% of the vote would be the winner. As you know, in the state, for Governor Raimondo's first election, she received less than a majority, as had Peter Kilmartin in his first run for Attorney General. Not receiving a majority, I think, is problematic. I don't know that it expresses the will of the voters, and it also, I think, for the victorious candidate who didn't get a majority, I think it undermines their mandate to govern, knowing that a majority wasn't obtained. So what instant runoff voting does is that you would have, let's say, 3 people on the ballot. You would mark your first and second choices. Once all the votes were tallied, if nobody received a majority of the first votes, the person with the least first votes would be eliminated, and then everyone who had voted for that eliminated candidate, their second votes would be apportioned to the other 2 remaining candidates. And that would proceed until someone finally obtained a majority. It makes a lot of sense. I've confirmed with the Secretary of State's office that our new voting machines can handle instant runoff voting. It's where a lot of us are going. A lot of the states are going. I want to also add that a lot of states use runoff voting for their elections. Specifically, 10 states do for their party primaries, and Georgia and Louisiana for their general elections. If you remember, there was a senatorial election, 2 senatorial elections in Georgia this past year, where no candidate got a majority in November, and so then there was a runoff in January. It makes a lot of sense. The technology is there to do this right, to better reflect the will of the voters. And it's my 5th year putting it in. I hope this is the year, Chairman.
Thank you, Leader Filippi. Chairman Corvesi.
Good afternoon, Leader.
Good afternoon, Chairman.
So, tell you what, walk me through a typical primary election season. So, we have, in the primary season, we have a Democratic primary, let's say, and a Republican primary. And we have 3 candidates in each. In the election, we're going to have a Democrat, a Republican, whoever wins the primary, and we're going to have, let's say, 2 other independents. So walk me through how things would work.
For the primary or the general?
Start with the primary.
Well, I believe this applies just to the general, but let's suppose it applied to the primary.
Okay,
right?
so you're saying this only applies to the general?
Yes.
Okay, so now we have 5 candidates in the general election. Democrat, Republican, and I'll be kind, 3 independents. And the winner gets a plurality of the vote. Are you saying that there's another election after that between the top 2 candidates?
So what's great about instant runoff voting, Chairman, is that it all happens on one ballot. You would mark your first choice. So if there's 5 people running, you would mark your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, and your fourth choice. And so once that happens, all the ballots are put in, all the first choices would be counted. No one gets a majority of first choices. The person with the least first choices is eliminated, right? And then everyone who had voted for that candidate, the eliminated candidate, their second choices would then be reapportioned to the remaining 4 candidates. And then if no one had a majority at that point, the candidate with the 4th fewest first choices is eliminated, and their second choices are reapportioned. And that happens until any one of those candidates finally hits a majority. So it all happens on one election, one night, one ballot.
Well, I thank you for that explanation, and I can see why it hasn't passed. Thank you.
Representative Knight.
Well, I can't, maybe you could explain that, Chairman, because I would love to understand your rationale. Maybe we could work together to make it better.
Let me take a crack at it.
I don't think so.
Leader Filippi, because I got hung up on this too when I was trying to figure out how this worked in Maine. I was talking to someone in, it's Maine, right, Leader Filippi?
Maine and Alaska.
Right. So I was talking to someone in Maine. I said, how does that work? And this is the part that they always gloss over that made it make sense to me. You have the first election, no one gets a majority, and what happens is they cut off the bottom guy. Then they take if I have this right, the top vote getter, I believe, retains the votes they had, but they reapportion the person's votes who were eliminated. So let's say it's Smith, Jones, and Knight. It's Smith, Jones, and Knight. Now Smith gets 40 votes, Jones gets 30 votes, and Knight gets 10. They lop off Knight, he goes away. Now there's 10 free votes. And you go to the second choice of those voters and reapportion amongst the other 2.
In a sense, they get to vote twice.
They get to vote twice. If their guy's at the bottom, right? So you can see an election where there's a favored, vanity candidate of some kind, and a lot of people want to at least express some support. So he's like the third choice, or the second choice, or the first choice, but he doesn't make it. And then you go down, down those voters' lists. There are the real candidates, so to speak, and then they'll get a reapportioned. But the key thing to remember is, and this is what jammed me up, is that the people who stay in the race retain the votes they already got. The person who's eliminated, their votes are reapportioned.
Correct. Correct. So
that
it's
always
essentially
confused me.
So. I think you'd have to consider each round another election. Right. Each round would be a runoff.
Keep going.
And for each round, Chairman Cavesi, essentially everyone, if there's 2 rounds, everyone gets to vote twice, because the people in the second round whose candidate made it into the second round, essentially their votes stay with their preferred candidate in that second round.
Right.
And
Representative Agello?
yeah, I listen to numbers and pay a lot of attention to numbers, and Jason Knight just suggested a 3-way election where the one that got the most votes got 40, next most votes got 30, and then the next most got 10. So the person who came in third, if all his votes, her votes, went to the person in second place, then you'd have a tie. What do you do about that, Leader Filippi?
So if you had a tie,
Chances of that are the same as happening now.
oh, wow. So what would happen if you had a 50-50 tie? Don't in some places they pick a deck?
Well,
In our state, if we don't do it as grand committee? I mean, you're asking a question that's present in a plurality election as well. It's not intended to deal with that. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think would happen if it was a tied election? I know some places they use a deck.
Cage match at Twin River.
Well, I think that's an issue regardless of what happens with your resolution.
Maybe grand committee.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it.
Any other questions for Leader Filippi? All right, Leader, do you want to move on to 5420 now?
Yeah, with pleasure. So this is another constitutional amendment, I think, to reorder our regulatory process. Over the past, I'd say 80 years in this country, we've really moved into a regulatory state where legislatures have continuously delegated their legislative authority to executive branch administrative agencies, delegated their lawmaking authority, such that many administrative agencies now, through the regulatory process, enact regulations that have the force of law. I've always followed this with consternation. I believe that lawmakers should be making the laws, and regulatory bodies should just be putting fine points on those laws as opposed to crafting large bodies of rules that govern our lives, especially when those rules carry with them civil and potential criminal penalties for noncompliance. So I've looked around the country, and there's 2 states now. Let me keep it a little broader first. There's 33 states that have legislative bodies tasked with oversight of administrative agency regulations, and there are 2 states which have constitutional provisions which require their legislature to approve substantive regulations passed by administrative agencies, and that is Arkansas and Nevada. And currently, in front of the Kansas legislature, there's a proposed constitutional amendment similar to this one that would require the General Assembly to approve substantive regulations. And substantive is different than procedural. Procedural is how you do things, and substantive is, what things are done or not done. I think it makes sense. We're the lawmakers. We're the ones who are elected, and that it really should be our decision as to what carries with it the force of law or not. And that's the purpose of this resolution.
Chairman Corvese.
Leader Filippi.
Yes?
You have this one right. I think there really is a problem when we're not in session that rules and regulations are promulgated that we have no influence on, and I think that's very wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Knight.
That's a good bill. Thank you, Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Representative Knight.
Anybody else on Representative McGaugh?
Yes, thank you. If you could just explain for me, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just hoping that you can explain to me what you mean by substantive regulation. If you could just further define that.
Yeah, certainly. So if you have, let's say, a Department of Environmental Management regulation about what you can do with property or what you can't do with property, what you can't do on certain property, how you can use certain property, that's substantive. That's like a substance. A procedural regulation would be that you have to, make an application within 30 days or an appeal within 20 days, or what documents you need to attach to an appeal. So substantive is not procedural, it's actual rules that the people must follow, as opposed to how they operate within the administrative framework.
Any other questions for Leader Filippi? Okay, on 5419 and 5420, Randall Rose has testified to testify verbally on both of those. And on 5420, Save the Bay has testified or submitted written testimony opposed to 5420. Is Mr. Rose available? Good afternoon, Mr. Rose. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Leader Filippi's resolutions, and you've signed up in support of 5419 and opposed to 5420. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Stanley and members of the committee. Let me first address the one on regulations 5420. I am opposed to this. The General Assembly already has authority to legislatively override any regulation that they want. And all regulations that are issued under the authority of laws passed by the General Assembly, which enable the issuing of regulations. So the General Assembly does have not only pre-authorized the issuing of regulations, but also has the ability to take that back whenever the General Assembly so desires. I think that it may sound nice to give the General Assembly an extra voice in regulations, but the way this would play out in practice is not going to be very good. First of all, the way the constitutional amendment is written, it implies that a regulation will become null and void if the General Assembly takes no action. No regulation will take effect unless the General Assembly affirmatively ratifies the election. No regulation will take effect unless the General Assembly affirmatively ratifies the regulation. So if the General Assembly simply does nothing, the regulation doesn't go into effect, it just disappears. That will make it extremely easy for lobbyists to quietly kill regulations just by having the General Assembly refuse to act. And I think that the regulatory process is designed to have principles of transparency, to be out in the open, receive public comment, but this would allow the regulations to be killed, as it were, in the middle of the night simply by talking to the appropriate people and not having the vote to ratify the regulation even come up for a vote. Also, it introduces a lot. If this constitutional amendment comes into effect, you will see a lot more deceptive posturing. Elected officials will proudly pass a law, and they will say this law is going to have great effects. It's going to, and it's going to be a law that requires regulations to implement. And then when the implementing regulations are issued, the same politicians who backed the law in the first place will turn around and not ratify the regulations that are issued under it. So you'll have elected officials taking credit for passing the law and then quietly not allowing the regulations to go into effect that are needed to implement the law. And that's a very bad outcome. In general, the General Assembly is already by far the most powerful branch of government. And in terms of keeping checks and balances, I don't think it's healthy to increase the power of the General Assembly even more, especially when that power would be exercised simply by having the presiding officer refuse to let the regulation come up for a vote. It's actually going to be a decrease in transparency. I'm fine with establishing more oversight over regulations. I would be fine with a constitutional amendment that allowed the people to override a regulation by a vote of the voters. That sounds completely fine. Some states do have provisions that allow the voting public to request a referendum to overturn laws, and that could be adapted for regulations too. That would be a good way of providing a democratic check on regulations. But the way this constitutional amendment is written, it's just basically it's it makes it much more likely that regulations will be overturned in a way that's not transparent, in a way that's not responsible to the people, because allowing regulations to be overturned without any affirmative vote simply by not holding a vote is the opposite of anything democratic. It does not bring anything closer to the people. So for those reasons, I'm opposed to the bill, especially since the General Assembly already has authority to overturn any regulation it wants by passing an affirmative bill, not by quietly killing a regulation simply by taking no action on it. So for all those reasons, I'm opposed to the bill. And let me go on to the instant runoff voting, unless there are any questions on that.
No questions. You can move on to 5419, Mr. Rose.
Okay. So on instant runoff voting, I am in favor of that. It is a good method to make sure that whoever is elected actually has the support of a majority of the voters. Right now, people can be elected with less than 50% with just a plurality. This allows people to voters' second choice to be taken into account and ensures that everyone who is elected actually is the one who the majority of voters preferred over the next most popular opponent. So it does ensure that people are elected with a majority. We've often had elections for governor, for instance, where the winning candidate does not have 50%. This will ensure that candidates will have 50% support, and by making an instant runoff system, which can be implemented in a way that gives results as soon as the votes are tallied. The reason why we didn't have instant runoff systems in the past was before the use of computers, it would have been very cumbersome to implement an instant runoff system. But with modern technology, it's no more difficult to implement instant runoff than any other system. And this system allows voters to express who their first choice, their second choice, and third choice is, and allows the voters to feel more heard. A question that came up earlier is what happens if there's a tie, and again, the outcome if there's a tie is the same that would happen under our current law, and our current law specifies what happens if there's a tie. In Rhode Island General Laws 1733, it says that if there's a tie in elections currently, the Secretary of State holds another election in about 10 days from that point, an extra election to settle the tie, but that's extremely unlikely. Tied elections are highly, highly uncommon. They happen once every decade or two in the whole United States, and extraordinarily rare in Rhode Island. That process would not change under instant runoff voting, but it's it's so rare that it hardly makes a difference. So I do support the instant runoff voting bill. That's already been put into law in the state of Maine and in other places, and it's a growing movement, and it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. That will conclude testimony on House Resolutions 5419 and 5420. Next, we'll move to Representative O'Brien's bill, House Bill 5423. Bill would require that the Secretary of EOHHS, Secretary of Commerce Corporation, and the Commissioners of Elementary and Secondary Education and Post-Secondary Education be appointed subject to approval of the Senate. Representative O'Brien is not available this afternoon to testify, but Jim Parisi from the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals has signed up with written and verbal testimony in support of the legislation. Is Mr. Parisi available? He is not. Okay. We'll give him a minute, and we'll just be at ease for a minute while we try and reach Mr. Parisi. While we are waiting, Representative Shallcross-Smith and Representative Nardone, You guys did not respond to the roll call vote. Would you like your presence recorded?
Present.
Representative
Present.
Shalcroft-Smith is present. I see Representative Nardone has been here, but it looks like he's not able to. They missed the vote. Okay. Okay. Representative Shalcroft-Smith, would you like your votes recorded in the affirmative to hold all bills on the calendar for further study?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parisi, are you there? Good afternoon, Mr. Parisi. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're here talking about Representative O'Brien's bill on House Bill 5423, and you are testifying in support. You have the floor. Welcome.
I am. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, committee members, for your attention. I submitted a short letter of support the other day. I just wanted to phone in to make a point of emphasis on this. This bill governs not only the appointment of a couple of jobs my union cares for, the K-12 commissioner and the higher ed commissioner, but the Secretary of EOHS and Commerce as well. But it's really the commissioner positions I care about. Well, what I want to emphasize to the committee is that we have a really secretive and opaque process to pick these important education leaders in Rhode Island. Very different than some other states, some of which even have elected commissioners or at least elected boards of ed that then appoint a commissioner. You know, we in the past couple of commissioner of K-12 appointments, we've had no public process. So stakeholders haven't been involved. I don't even think the rank and file board of ed members were involved in that appointment process. And then on the K-12, on the post-secondary side, there was a recent commissioner of higher ed who was hired, and there was no public process for that either, where in past years, at least stakeholder groups would be convened, people would have some kind of input. So Representative O'Brien's bill puts a little bit of public process in these appointments by having them go through the Senate advice and consent process. So at least there'd be some public questioning of people's candidates and viewpoints, you know, through the Senate committee process. At least there'd be some kind of public knowledge of what these appointments are before it's a done deal. So we think Representative O'Brien's bill is an important step in providing a little bit of sunshine on these important education leader position appointments by putting them through the Senate's advice and consent process. And I understand it's not House advice and consent, it's Senate advice and consent, but I hope that all House members appreciate that we have a problem that needs to be fixed, and this bill is a fix to that problem. Thank you for your attention.
Any questions for Mr. Parisi from members of the committee? All right, you're free to go, Mr. Parisi. Thank you for calling in.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good weekend, all.
The last bill on our calendar is from Chairman Bennett, and his committee is meeting at the same time as ours upstairs. Chairman Bennett, thank you so much for coming down. I know you got a busy hearing upstairs. We're going to consider Chairman Bennett's bill, House Bill 5417. This would exempt city or town of residence for city, town, and state police officers from the definition of a public record and would prohibit the release of the same. Chairman Bennett, you want to explain your bill?
Thank you, Chairman Shanley. These are tough times we're living in right now, and the public records, you can look up a cop's address, you can look up his phone number, and with what's going on with the public today, this could be very dangerous. And with your permission, Chairman, I would like to also do a sub-A and add correctional officers to this list. People are in a high tense state, and especially when it comes to policemen. Our state's been fairly well, but the public access records have to shelter the people that are trying to enforce the laws. That's about it. That's about what it is.
May I?
Chairman Corvesi.
Chairman Bennett, how are you?
Hi, good, Doctor. How are you?
Chairman, great bill.
Thank you.
Probably one of the best bills I've heard so far all session.
Thank you very much.
And I like that surveyor.
Are there any other questions or accolades for Representative Bennett on this bill? We have 7 witnesses signed up to testify on the bill. Chairman, I know you have a committee hearing that you probably have to get back to.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you to the committee. I have to go back upstairs. I got another committee going on that I'm the chairman of, and I have to get up there. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of written testimony that's been submitted, and you'll be able to see that as well. Let's start with Lieutenant Thomas Jones from the North Providence Police Department. Is Lieutenant Jones available? Lieutenant Jones, welcome. You're with the House Committee on State Government and Elections, and we're discussing Chairman Bennett's bill, House Bill 5417. You have the floor.
Good evening. Sorry I can't see everybody. I've had some audio difficulties, and now I'm in my vehicle. So hands-free. I'd like to say good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak to you this evening. I'm Lieutenant Jones from the North Providence Police Department. I am also the union president there. I'm actually second in command of the firearms unit. I'm calling to speak out on this bill because there's a few issues that, number one, I mean, it's very disrespectful to active police officers who all of you sitting in the room right now depend on, and the general public depend on, to keep them safe. And by doing so, we're required to carry that firearm. I'm second in command of our firearms unit, and I say that for a specific reason. Along with the privilege to be able to carry a firearm to protect our citizens, a lot of training goes into that, and qualification goes into that. And, you know, if speaking out of perspective for a second here, you know, a carpenter relies on their hammer. A police officer relies on that firearm. A lot of the times, a single shot doesn't even have to be fired for a situation to be de-escalated, Lieutenant? Maybe because of the presence of that firearm.
Lieutenant?
But I want you guys, yes.
So the bill that we're considering it doesn't have anything to do with firearms. It has to do with access to public records of police officers' home addresses.
Oh, excuse me. I mixed up the two bills. There was one about police officers not being able to carry after they retire. Another bill that was before.
That's probably a different committee on a different night.
It is. It was again. I'm on a cell phone. I apologize. For this specific bill, the records request for police officers' personal information is absurd to be even entertained, because whatever information the public needs to know as far as the execution of a police officer's duties during their on-duty time is readily available today, right now. It can be obtained. For the needs of somebody to get a police officer's personal address, I mean, let's use common sense and good judgment here. What would be the purpose if it was a job-specific incident, let's say, that somebody's inquiring about? That information's already available right now, that they can get it, and there's no need for protest. You know, police officers are human beings, and they live in society just like everyone sitting in the room right now. If you know, do you want outrage and have people protesting at police officers' homes for something that they're doing within the execution and majority of the time lawfully under statute and policy and procedure when they're executing their duties as police officers. I mean, I think we're just escalating a problem by allowing this information to be easily obtained. I mean, as it is, you can Google somebody's name and get most of the information you want. I think it's to cater or satisfy to a specific agenda. I don't know what that agenda is, but I mean, where's our protection and where's the common sense being used to say, you know what, we got to protect our police officers because they protect us. And it's just disrespectful to us. I don't see the benefit of it. Again, we're in the business of de-escalation. I don't see the benefit of giving out police officers' personal address, their home address. I mean, we don't give out doctors' addresses if there's a malpractice suit filed against them, which there's more malpractice in the healthcare field than there is in law enforcement. I mean, stats are the stats. I mean, why are we encouraging this? We should be educating the public and letting them know what's already readily available to them. That's really all I have to say on that, and I honestly appreciate your time and at least listening to me. I hope you consider my testimony tonight.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant. We do have one question for you from a member of the committee, Representative Knight.
Hi, Lieutenant. It's Representative Knight from Barrington. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir. How are you?
I'm
good evening.
Good. Good evening. I was just reading over the APRA law as it's written right now, and it appears to me that the only thing the public the street address of where an officer would live is not public right now as we speak. I think the only thing that is public is the town in which they live in. Does that change your opinion at all? I mean, I understand your concerns and your comments on the bill, and I generally agree with them. I don't want to see the addresses, the home addresses of officers being released either. Particularly with my experience as a youth, my father was a police officer, and you know, he was a career guy, and he ran into some public controversy as well. But right now, APRA makes the town of residence public, but not the street address. Is that your understanding?
We've got it in a few different parts of communication when it got distorted, but I'm glad you brought up that question. And first and foremost, please thank your father for his service, if he's still with you. If not, I apologize. But I'm glad you bring that up. And to give you a little history, before becoming into leadership on the police department, I have investigative experience, and I also started my career in the prison. This question is a great question because it actually, by giving the city in which they live in, makes it a lot easier to narrow down a search. So if somebody's really trying to find an individual, by giving them the city, you pretty much knock off a lot of the research they're going to have to do if they're that adamant on locating a police officer. And, you know, again, a lot of the times in our job, I can tell you from experience, and you reiterated through your father's experiences. I mean, I feel that the legislature should do more to protect us because of the job that we're exposed to. Yes, we did sign up for it. We understand the risks that are associated with it. But most of the times that we're in these situations where somebody may want to reach out and touch us and find our home addresses, the officers are lawfully doing their job, what's required, what we're sworn to do by state statute, by federal law. But we're doing a job that we were sworn to do, and we don't create these laws that we enforce. We enforce them. We swear to enforce them with professionalism, with pride, with honor, and by giving the city or the town that the officer lives in, you're basically cutting out a lot of the legwork that needs to be done if somebody that wants to do or has malicious will against an officer, whatever reason they're seeking them out for, it just makes it a little easier, in my opinion, and I hope that's something you guys will consider because it's important. We have to protect our police officers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Lieutenant Jones? Okay, Lieutenant, thank you very much for calling in tonight.
Thank you. Have a safe weekend, and thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
The next witness that we have signed up for verbal testimony is Dimitri Lysakatos, and I apologize if I mispronounce his last name.
It just makes it a little easier.
Is Dimitri?
It is.
Good afternoon. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Representative Bennett's bill, and you've signed up in opposition to the bill. Welcome. You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Dimitri Lysakatos, and I'm here representing Mrs. Lynn Farinelli, myself, and the Rhode Island Accountability Project in opposing Bill 4517. Just to give you guys a little bit of background on the Rhode Island Accountability Project, it was a group started in 2016 that utilizes the Rhode Island Access to Public Records Act to maintain a database of Rhode Island professional standards reports from Rhode Island law enforcement agencies throughout the state. Our database can be viewed by the public at the Rhode Island Accountabilityproject.com website. I believe everyone considering House Bill 4517 today needs to know a little bit about the history of this bill and why it's being brought before you for consideration. Bill 4517 was generated as a response to a public records request placed by Mrs. Lynn Farinelli to the City of Pawtucket for the cities and towns that the Pawtucket police officers reside in. I want to make it perfectly clear that unlike the fear-mongering, misinformation, and bullying put out by the media, in the media by the Pawtucket Police Department Union President James Baino and other law enforcement agencies, that this request never included the addresses of police officers. Now, again, I heard this mentioned by Mr. Bennett and by the officer recently, just now from the North Providence Police Department. I think, push that narrative is disingenuous. The request for this information was placed to complete a statistical analysis into the correlation between officers who reside in the city of Pawtucket and their personal participation in that community. Hello?
You're still on with us.
I'm sorry?
I said we can still hear you.
Okay, let me just go back a second. I thought you tried to chime in. The request for this information was placed to complete a statistical analysis into the correlation between officers who reside in the city of Pawtucket and their personal participation in that community, as compared to officers who reside outside of the community. This type of analysis is of paramount public interest and has long been considered public record, and was also confirmed by the Attorney General's decision to be a public record. The argument that public information such as this may lessen the difficulty to determine an officer's address is not based on a credible threat. The facts are that any group or individual
Dimitri, are you still with us? Is he still on the line? The line's still up? Okay. Maybe we'll move on to the next witness, and if we can get him back, we'll give him an opportunity to finish. Representative Newberry?
Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation. It could be a question, more of an observation of what the witness was saying. I understand that there is a certain value to knowing how many officers in a particular department live in the town versus don't, because you could argue that maybe they're more ingrained or whatever. That you don't need to know their addresses or where they live to know that. You can put a simple request to the police department and say, I don't know how many officers Pawtucket has, but let's say there's 100 officers. and say, how many of your 100 officers live in Pawtucket and how many don't? That solves that problem.
De-identify the information pretty
Yeah,
easily.
exactly. I don't see any reason why anybody needs to necessarily know where any police officer or anyone else who doesn't want to have their address public lives, just in general.
Let's move on to Ryan Holt. Is Mr. Holt available? Good afternoon, Ryan. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Chairman Bennett's bill, and you have the floor. Welcome. Is that an issue on Mr. Holt's end or on our end? Okay. We'll keep moving down the list.
Mr. Chair, before we move on, it's Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy. The one question I would have, I'm someone who does real estate appraisals, and every once in a while I find that there's a property that there's no information available. You know that a house exists there. You can see the information is there when you look at Google Maps and other things. But what I find out is that property is occupied by a police officer who requested that the information not be made available. And if I'm trying to do an appraisal, it makes it very difficult when I can't obtain the information. I don't care that a police officer is living in that house, but if I can't get the information about that house, it makes it very difficult for me to do my job. So I recognize the importance of this piece of legislation, but there's also, in most of our communities, the ability that you're supposed to be able to get information publicly.
Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy. All right, Ryan Holt is now on the line and available. Mr. Holt?
Mr. Chairman.
How are you? This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Chairman Bennett's bill. You are signed up on behalf of the AG in support. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I will do my best to keep my comments brief. This is Ryan Holt, the Director of Legislative Affairs for Attorney General Morona, signing up in support of 5417. This, I believe, came about following a recent APRA finding from our office, after which, we've received some feedback from the law enforcement community, with concerns about the safety and security of their families. And we have noted to them, as well as to others at the hearing on this bill last year, that our interpretation of the current law has not changed. And the only way for them to effectuate that change would be to seek the amendments to APRA that they are seeking here. One thing I would note is that, while this change would not allow for the disclosure of the individual officers, city or town of residence, I do not believe it would preclude the city or town from releasing an aggregated portion of the data. For example, how many officers in a certain city live in another city or another city or another, in a more aggregate, less identifying form. And for that reason, just to reiterate, our position in the finding that we've taken has not changed, but we do support the changes contained within Chairman Bennett's bill 5417. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Chairman Corvese has a question for you.
How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing fine, Chairman. How are you?
Good. You said that if I understood you correctly, that the genesis of this bill was due to an APRA request that was made by our office or to your office?
It was a request made to the city of Pawtucket, I believe, and an APRA finding that our office had made, saying that we do believe that the information currently is subject to disclosure under APRA.
Okay. And tangentially, are the authors of APRA requests public knowledge?
Usually, yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Holt?
But it can't, I believe they can request that they're not known, but usually, yes.
Well, I guess what I mean is there some statute that allows for the transparency of authors of APRA requests?
That's a good question, Chairman, and I'd have to get back to you on that one.
I wouldn't mind if you do.
Happy to.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. Next witness that we have signed up is Steve Brown from the ACLU. Is Mr. Brown available? Good afternoon, Steve. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Chairman?
I'm doing great, thank you. We're discussing House Bill 5417 from Chairman Bennett, and you have signed up on behalf of the ACLU in opposition to the legislation. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you, members of the committee. On behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island, I do wish to express our organization's opposition to this legislation. I first want to emphasize something that does keep on going in and out, and Representative Knight put his finger on it. This does not deal at all with addresses. It simply deals with the city or town of residence of officers. Already, APRA severely restricts the amount of personnel information that can be disclosed. The residence of public employees is one of the very few pieces of information that is public, and we believe that there are legitimate reasons for keeping it public. Mr. Lissicatos, who was involved in the APRA request that has led to this bill, was explaining, some of the things they were trying to do with the residence information. We can think of a lot of situations where residence information might be helpful. For example, are police officers who are charged with misconduct of any kind, are they most likely to come from the community they're serving, or are they from other communities? This is all legitimate information. We don't believe that simply providing a resident, providing a municipality, will create all these horror stories of individuals finding street addresses. If somebody wants to find a street address, they'll be able to find it regardless of whether they know where the particular municipality is. And we're concerned about the precedent that this ultimately sets, because if you're concerned that the residency of a the municipality where a police officer lives might give their street address, might lead to their street address, and therefore you want to protect that, what do you do with an officer who has an uncommon surname? Do you say that they can keep their name secret because somebody might be able to find their street address because of their name? So for all those reasons, we urge opposition to this legislation. We certainly have no problem with a bill that would make clear that street addresses are not public, but we do oppose making secret the municipalities where public servants live. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Brown from members of the committee? No questions. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Next witness we have signed up is Randall Rose. Is Mr. Rose available? Good afternoon, Mr. Rose. Evan Shanley calling again from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Chairman Bennett's bill, and you are signed up in opposition. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Shanley and members of the committee. I just turned off my sound here. Let me just explain what the root of this issue is. The root of the issue is that a number of cities and towns in Rhode Island would like to have police officers who reside within the town, and they are not allowed to do so. I've heard from elected officials in Providence, for instance, who would like to require Providence police officers to reside in the city of Providence, but a state law says that municipalities do not have the option of requiring their police force to live in the municipality. In fact, Rhode Island cities and towns are not even allowed to require that police officers have to be Rhode Islanders. There's a law that preempts them and says that that no city and town can require that their police officers even are from Rhode Island, let alone being from the town that they're supposed to serve. And obviously, there are problems with this existing state law. It does contribute to a pattern where some police officers feel that it's not a good idea to live in the town that they're patrolling. It may lead to looking down on the residents of the town they patrol, which is obviously not a good idea. And across the country, there are quite a few cities and towns of all sizes that require police officers to live within the limits of the city and town. Unfortunately, that's not allowed in Rhode Island. So what this bill would do is it would actually compound the problem, because it would mean it's no longer even possible to do research on whether police officers who live outside the town or police officers who aren't even Rhode Islanders are more likely to have complaints against them, more likely to cause liability for their cities, and so on. Not only is the General Assembly thwarting the will of cities and towns and residents who would like to have local police officers, it's not even allowing the towns and the residents to find out whether the police officers who don't live there are causing more problems. So it's very problematic in that way. Now, the ostensible case for this bill is that if it was known what city or town a police officer would live in, that would make them more vulnerable. To which there are two answers. One you've heard already, which is that this is not about releasing the street address of a police officer. It's only releasing the city or town that they live in to enable studies to be done. But second, in the cities and in the many cities and towns across the United States that do require police officers to live in the municipality, every police officer's hometown is already known, because the police officers do live in the municipality. Does that mean that police officers are suddenly going to get killed or harassed? That's not been the experience in other cities and towns across the United States, which require police officers to live in the municipality, even though every single police officer on their force has a known hometown. So I'm sorry, but that idea is completely implausible when you think about it. It's very clear that this does not lead to harassment or killing of police officers when a police officer's hometown is known. And as Steve Brown pointed out, in this day and age, anybody who is determined enough can find out somebody's street address and hometown, unless people take really extraordinary precautions. Even the best computer security researchers have been subject to harassment when their home address has been learned. This bill is not going to prevent police officers' street address from being learned, but it is. But in any case, if you're discussing the issue of whether it should be possible to learn police officers' hometown, the experience of municipalities which require their police officers to be residents is conclusive evidence against that concern. So I do oppose the bill in the present form. I just want to reply to something else that Ryan Holt said. Ryan Holt said that in the opinion of the Attorney General, this bill would not restrict it would not restrict releasing aggregate or statistical information. Unfortunately, I don't think we can rely on that assurance. That may be the position of the present Attorney General. It is not necessarily the position of future Attorneys General. And APRA requests are handled by the agency being requested. So, police chief, if you a police chief looking at the legal language of this bill, if it went into law, a police chief could easily say, no, I don't think any information about cities or towns of residents counts as public information, and that would be the interpretation of the police chief, which would prevail. It's not going to even be possible to release statistical information, let alone it would not be. I don't think that as this bill would be implemented by police departments, I don't think it would be possible to release information such as what percentage of the police force lives out of town, let alone more sensitive statistical information such as are police officers living out of town subject to more complaints. So in effect, this bill prohibits statistical studies as well as releasing information about individual police officers. But as I've said, even when information about individual police officers is legally accessible, it doesn't make a difference in practice because of the experience of cities and towns outside Rhode Island that require their officers to be residents. So for these reasons, I oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Any questions for Mr. Rose? Next witness we have signed up is Tony Capezza, who is signed up in support. Is Mr. Capezza available? Good afternoon, Mr. Capezza. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Representative Bennett's bill, House Bill 5417. You are signed up in support and you have the floor. Welcome. While we're waiting for him, we'll go over who's signed up with written testimony only. Scott Moody from the Newport Fraternal Order of Police has signed up in support with written testimony. John Donnelly from the President of the Rhode Island State Lodge has submitted written testimony in support. Steve Brown has submitted written testimony opposed from the ACLU. Michael Imundi Sr., the President of the Providence FOP Lodge, has submit a letter in support. And Jeffrey Arujo, Vice President of the Central Falls FOP Lodge, has submitted written testimony in support. Is Mr. Capezza available now? Good afternoon, Mr. Capezza. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me this time?
Excellent, yes. Welcome. We're here discussing Representative Bennett's bill, House Bill 5417, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. My name is Tony Capezza, and I am the State Director of the International Brotherhood of Police Officers. The IBPO is the bargaining representative for 28 municipal police departments in the state. I come before you today on behalf of those departments in support of H5417. As you know, this bill would restrict the release of the city or town that a police officer resides in. This is not only for the protection of the police officer, but also for his or her family. You have already heard testimony from people that are against this bill, saying that there are other ways that an individual could use to obtain the officer's address. This is true, but this bill, if passed, would make it more difficult. To give you an example, and this is in line with what Representative Knight was asking about, just by releasing the city or town that the officer lives in, if I wanted to get that officer's address, I then just have to go on that municipality's tax page, look at the tax rolls, and I would very easily come up with the address of the officer. On the other hand, without knowing those cities and towns, there could be several people
living within that community, within the state, that have the same last name, it would be very difficult to determine which one of those people is actually the police officer. Another argument we've heard in the past, and we've heard it tonight, is that the taxpayers deserve to know where their police officers live for transparency reasons. My testimony is in complete line with Representative Newberry's statement shortly ago, because I firmly believe that if you are doing studies, all you need is the number of the police officers that actually reside outside of the city or the town they work in. You don't have to know the city and town. Basically, what it boils down to is the public's right to know versus an officer's right to privacy. I believe an individual's right to privacy outweighs the public's right to know when it becomes a safety issue. Not only is it a privacy issue, it is also a safety issue. There is no doubt that criminals that our officers are arresting today are more violent than they were in the past. As you all know, police officers are being killed more frequently today. And let us not forget what just recently happened in New Jersey with Judge Esther Salas' husband and son, Daniel, who was gunned down when he answered their front door. The actual target in this case was actually the judge. As a result of this incident, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy signed into law on November 20th Daniel's law that makes it a crime to publish the personal information of judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officers, included their phone numbers and home addresses. In addition to New Jersey, there are 6 other states that have passed legislation prohibiting the release of information on police officers, and it goes a lot farther than this bill does, because it includes photos, addresses, date of birth, all personal information. And those states are California, Colorado, Idaho, Texas, Nevada, and Utah. The bill you have in front of you today is needed in Rhode Island, although not to the same extent as New Jersey. I am personally aware of 2 incidents where arrestees have shown up at police officers' homes after they have been arrested. Fortunately, these incidents were not as serious as New Jersey, but to the extent that police officers' families were harassed. In one case, it was the officer's wife who was being harassed, and in another case, it was the arrestee driving by the officer's house, constantly blowing the horn. What I'd like to address also is Mr. Rose's statements. What this bill is not about, it is not a residency bill, as Mr. Rose presented it. This has nothing to do with whether or not officers live in the community they work in or they live elsewhere. I could go on for quite some time, but I know many of you heard this testimony before. So for these reasons, I ask you to support H5417, which will protect our law enforcement officers. And I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this testimony, and I would be very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Capezza? Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Same to you, and thank you to the committee.
We do have one more witness to go back to. Dimitri was testifying earlier and was cut off and is available to finish his testimony now. Do we have him on the line? Dimitri, welcome back.
Yes, thank you.
So you have an opportunity to finish your testimony.
Great. I wasn't sure how far I got with it. I guess I'll back up a little bit. My name is Dimitri Lysicatos with the Rhode Island Accountability Project. And, we're a nonprofit group that has a database of internal affairs reports from trying to do every city and state.
Dimitri, we got most of the background the last time. You had gotten pretty far into the merits of the bill itself. If you want to pick up somewhere along that lines.
All right. Well, I'd like to everyone voting on this bill to consider the actions of the Attorney General's office regarding their previous support of this bill, and I believe I just heard him support the bill again on this hearing. I believe their actions and testimony in this matter may be a conflict of interest. In our opinion, the conflict arises when the AG is tasked with defending the APRA on law enforcement privacy issues. The fact that they themselves are the top law enforcement agency with their own privacy interests, along with close personal relationships with the agencies involved in these disputes, we find problematic. As the Rhode Island Accountability Project and other groups have pointed out, we believe that there has been a concerted effort between the AG's office and law enforcement agencies to roll back long-standing public record decisions involving police privacy issues and professional standards investigations. The facts are that the AG's office has already issued a decision on Marinelli's public records request regarding this matter, and that their decision against the city of Pawtucket was ignored by the city. The AG's office then filed a complaint in Lynn Farinelli's behalf to the Superior Court, but has yet to assign the matter. The AG's office has also previously defended this bill. It is painfully obvious that this bill was meant to bypass the Superior Court decision on this matter by modifying the APRA prior to a Superior Court decision, meaning that if you pass this bill now, the case in Superior Court will be null and void. That's extremely problematic. I don't even understand why it was brought up. Why not let the Supreme Court decide, the Superior Court decide? I ask that those voting on this bill hold the AG's office to the standard of defending Lynn Farinelli in this matter before any decisions are made that can supersede that decision. And that's about all my testimony. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Dimitri? Thank you for your testimony, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman Corvesi?
I believe there was a letter that was sent to us by Providence Lodge Number 3, Fraternal Order of Police, that the author wanted to have read into the record. This is dated February 25th, 2021. The Providence Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge Number 3, wishes to voice our strong support for House Bill 5417, introduced on February 5th, 2021 by Representative David Bennett. The bill aims to provide a provision to the Rhode Island Access to Public Records Act exempting the name of the city or town of residence of any Rhode Island city, town, or state police officer from being deemed a, quote, public record, unquote, subject to release to the public. House Bill 5417 aims to enact one simple step towards the protection of the privacy of our police officers with the sole intent of protecting the health and safety of said police officers. Especially over the last year, police officers are plainly and simply under attack, both at their jobs while working and sadly while off duty and at home with their families. The attacks on police officers in uniform is one thing, but the increase in threats to harassment of police officers and their families at home while off duty is a scary and dangerous trend that needs to be stopped in its tracks. So any step taken to protect the disclosure of our police officers' home addresses is a crucial step towards the protection of the safety of those officers and their families. The, quote, doxing, unquote, of police officers, in effect, the unauthorized and sometimes illegal release of the names and addresses of police officers, most times in order to threaten the peace and safety of their homes and families, to harass and intimidate police officers or to seek retribution, has been on the rise over the last year. A quick review of recent news articles shows that large numbers of police officers have been overtly doxed in threatening and intimidating manners in Portland, Oregon, Chicago, Kansas City, and right here in Providence. These incidents invoked police investigations, police protection of the doxed officers, and even legislative movements to criminalize doxing. Here in Providence, as a result of an incident in which no wrongdoing on the part of the police officer was found, 3 Providence police officers were doxxed in a very threatening manner, requiring police presence and protection to be provided to those officers' homes and families. While there is obviously no room for police brutality or misconduct in our society, there is also clearly no room, justification, or excuse for members of the public to threaten or harass our police officers, especially at home with their families. This is a dangerous and unlawful practice that must be stopped immediately. Therefore, preventing the release of the cities and towns, and hopefully the addresses, where our police officers and their families live under the Rhode Island Access to Public Records Act is a step in the right direction. So again, the Providence Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge Number 3, voices our strong support for House Bill 5417. Sincerely, Providence FOP Lodge Number 3, President Michael D.I. Mundy, Sr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Corvese. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 5417 in our calendar for the day. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Moved by Chairman Corvese, seconded by Representative Newberry. We're adjourned. Thank you.